How's it going, YouTube? Coming at you today with another video, and today, guys, what the new is going to be the GGYGO Season 2, Episode 1 of the podcast. Welcome everyone back. I appreciate everyone for being here. I know that these discussions were something that were really sought after, and they disappeared for a while, but they are back. Just going to be even more content pushing forward after this. Of course, there's no ban list yet, so that's going to be a little bit of what we talk about today. Unfortunately, we're all kind of waiting to see what Philly is going to be under, and especially what Nats is going to be under is even more important right now. But just introducing some of my guests here today.
How's it going, everybody? My name is Galzo. I do branded and SPI content over on YouTube and active also on Twitter.
Hey y'all, I'm Eva, aka Eva Elise. You can find me on Twitch and Twitter. You probably will find me talking about trap cards. But yeah, really happy to be here.
And hi, everybody. I'm Roarkallos. I think I'm most known on Twitch at the moment, but though I do have a small YouTube channel, and you could catch me on Twitch playing either Tier Lament or Exo Sister is what I'm most known for.
Both decks have a great format.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't already checked out my sponsors over at Imperial Duelist, Dragon Shield, Gem, or Sleeve Chief, definitely go ahead and check them all out down in the description below. And without further ado, let's hop right on into our first topic of the day. So the first thing I want to bring up is, what is everyone's favorite card? I know for me, it's still Forbidden Droplet. I know that the entire Cashier deck has really put a stop to this card. We haven't seen it in a while, but hopefully we see Cashier get the tier treatment, and then this card can come back into the game, because it's still one of the strongest cards that we have available.
I think that for me right now, it's definitely going to be Branded Retribution. I think people really still don't know what the card does. It allows you to play through so many things, get a card to your hand, and of course the on-field effect. So I think right now it's such a cool card.
I would say for like nostalgia purposes, Blackwing Gale the Whirlwind is part of the first deck I ever built, even though I didn't even play competitively at that time. But in terms of mechanics, Small World. Every time someone activates Small World, I'm just so excited. I'm rubbing my hands like, what are they going to be bridging? What are they going to be searching? It's such a cool card, and I'm so glad that something like that was printed.
My favorite is it's Kit Kalos. Yeah, I know she's banned, and I have dealt with her being banned twice, and I will most likely deal with her being banned 3 times. But she is my favorite card of all time. If you put a gun to my head, the answer is always going to be Kit Kalos. I have plenty of other answers. Exo Sister Martha, Baphomet, if we want to go classic, if we want to go aesthetic, Wavering Eyes, etc. But it's Kit Kalos. It's always Kit Kalos.
Hey, one of these days, Wavering Eyes is going to be good again. That card's brutal. So leaning into the next topic here, we have ban list ideas. I think the number one thing that's on everyone's mind right now is the Gimmick Puppet, just because this card is so insane to get dropped on. There's nothing that you can do. I see you shaking your head no. What do you think is going to be on the ban list?
I mean, to be perfectly honest, I think that's a valid point. I'm just joking around. I think that every week, my opinion changes. I think I started off with saying that Gimmick Puppet Nightmare should be the only card banned. I think since you have the new Albion, which can get it pretty easily, but then you also have Expulsion, which allows you to do to double down on the whole thing, so that your opponent basically needs 3 outs to the whole thing. I think that it might actually be Expulsion that needs to get banned. But to be honest, either one of these is just not going to be enough. I think that the problem, the main thing with Gimmick Puppet Nightmare is the fact that you can send it off of Grand Guignol. And if you ban Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, the rest of the targets are basically either kind of hard to get to the graveyard, like DD Orthros, which does a similar thing, but it's a level 4 dark. It's going to be much harder to bring to the graveyard. And then you have all the Rise Disciple, the Edo, which are basically sort of like a stronger Ibli, maybe even not a stronger Ibli, just an Ibli that you need to get rid of. It's not a lingering effect. So right now, I don't want to be in Konami's shoes, because this is a really, really a hard one. But I think either one of these, definitely Expulsion or Puppet, or maybe even both, or just Branded Fusion to 1 and close it at that.
Scary thoughts there. But I think that it's so difficult because of the accessibility with Grand Guignol. And so being able to force branded players to have to play Ra's Disciple, Edo, and something like that, I think that's an entirely fair trade, because it doesn't make the Gimmick Puppet lock just so accessible, just locking you out for an entire turn with a lingering effect. That's basically like a worse scythe that's put on your own field. Doesn't allow you to evenly match or lightning storm. So yeah, I would probably think that would be the right move.
Yeah, so you bring up a very good point, Galzo, with regards to the easy ability for Branded to set up Gimmick Puppet Lightmare through it being a send off Grand Guignol. I was always someone that was of the opinion that you shouldn't ban the card that they are summoning because they're just going to find a new card to summon. Or you can't ban Expulsion because they'll just do the same thing with the new Synchro. But the fact of the matter is that Gimmick Puppet is the one that applies the Lingering Floodgate. And if we have to go back to summoning Ra's Disciple or summoning Ido, then these cards at the very least can get flipped face down by cards like Book of Eclipse or Book of Moon, which are prevalent in the format right now or have been in the past.
Yeah, and I do think that cards like Gimmick Puppet definitely got to go. This is a card like Diabolosis that has to get banned. Like, these are very obvious picks right now too, just because like they're definitely, when you talk about issues in the format, like if you even look at it from a deck building standpoint, right, you have a lot of people who have to play 2-ofs in their extra deck just to respect Diabolosis, because otherwise you can't play the game. So that's kind of rough. If you look at even decks like Dragon right now, they're not super playable because of the fact that you have cards like Striker Dragon that get hit, and it's really unfortunate. So that's why you see a lot more people leaning toward like Bestial Control, so it's not super reliant on things like Striker Dragon. I do think that with the Monstrous Revenge coming out, the Altar of Engage, a lot of the new Striker cards being printed, potentially seeing something like Engage to 2. I could end up seeing too, like I know Galzo mentioned Branded Fusion to 1. I could see that too. Maybe like Blaster back in the game. I don't think Blaster's going to do anything. I do think, however, title sending Enchantress would be wild. You probably have to hit Fenrir in some way, shape, or form, right? Like Fenrir is just like really crazy. It's a really nuts card. It's being splashed into everything. But I do think that Kashtira ends up getting hit in some fashion, like more so than just Diabolosis. But overall, I think that the next ban list we get might not be like massive, but it'll definitely be a ban list that we need.
I have one card that like I don't think gets talked about enough, and I feel should probably be hit, not banned, but at least to 1. Pot of Prosperity. I think it like flies under the radar of a lot of the Yu-Gi-Oh community, but in games 2 and 3, Prosperity is like the scariest card that my opponent could start off with.
Yeah, especially in a format where you can get punished by Gamma.
Mm-hmm.
Straight up. And, that's the thing about it, is that it's such a powerful card and increases the consistency of seeing your going second, your board breakers and everything. That like, since Prosperity's come on, I don't really like playing decks that don't play Prosperity in a lot of cases. Because like it just gives you so many options for seeing evenly matched, for seeing Dark Ruler, Lava Golem, Spear Mode, whatever that might be, that will just absolutely break your opponent's board. So it's such a powerful card, and I completely agree with you. If it were to go to 1, I mean, I would be upset because I play a lot of decks with it. But in terms of its power level, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, because of the fact that even if you look at Duality, right, the hard lock on Duality, just to look at 3, but you can use Prosperity for free in a lot of decks because you're just banishing cards that you would use to help break a board going second anyway, or like just extra cards. So it's even crazier because then you can just be like, all right, cool, I can search like my Dim Barrier or what have you, and that just makes it even wild, because like at that point, right, you're just getting anything that you need, again, especially in a format where you can go activate Prosperity that actually Gamma them and then go into a free Baron off SL. So definitely a lot of very free and a lot of very scary situations to be in, but I could definitely see Prosperity getting hit too.
Not to mention the cost is kind of circumvented by a Rise Heart right now. The fact that they're like putting cards underneath a Rise Heart from the extra deck and then using that to plus that's not the way the card was intended to be used.
Nope.
So going into our next topic here, this is something that I really wanted to ask all of you. Do we think that Runic needs a hit?
I think that Runic has a big problem this format right now. I think that Runic is, once we got Super Heavy Samurai, it instantly shifted the meta in a way where everybody was just trying to jam as many hand traps into their deck as possible. Like right now, if you don't play hand traps, you don't even stand a chance. You can play some board breakers. Those might not even work as well because you have like spell cancer and stuff like that. You need some sort of way to play hand traps. So you have Kashtira, which play a lot of hand traps. They have the room for it. You have Super Heavy Samurai, of course, which also play a lot of hand traps. Then you have Branded that don't actually play hand traps at all. And then you have Runic, and maybe Sprite can play a little bit, but Runic specifically, and if we're talking about Naturia, they need to play a lot of Runic cards. And when you look at deck lists of Runic Naturia, they don't actually have room for that many hand traps at all. So that puts Runic in a very weird spot in this format, because like we're in this in-between state where Kastra is still a thing, but we all kind of know it's a dead man walking situation. And then we have Super Heavy Samurai, which is still going to be here the day after. And we have Runic, which is like in a weird spot because it just can't play enough hand traps. And does it need a hit? Maybe. But right now, it's always been like something, for example, like Branded, where a lot of people say that Branded Fusion is a crazy card. And the deck has always been relatively strong. But when it doesn't do anything like spectacular, then they forget about it in the ban list, and it just goes untouched. And right now, Runic is probably going to be sort of like in the same spot because it's not going to be able to contend.
Yeah, I agree with you. Before Cyac, I definitely would have said like that Runic should have been hit, and the hit was probably Hugin to 1. That's what I think would have been the proper hit for the deck. But at the current moment, especially when you're having decks that are putting up, like, for example, when Pearly is putting up Noir, I don't really know what Runic is doing into Noir. And if they're going to Super Heavy Samurai, some of these builds are running Spell Canceller, some of them are running Exterio. So it's a kind of awkward place for Runic to be in. It's still a very powerful deck. Like the Naturia Runic builds are still quite powerful, but when you look at it's not as kind of a meta to the deck as the previous one was, which is hilarious for a meta that was even more, Kashtira dominant in a way.
I have to agree with the both of you. The only thing I would say is I'm a notorious Runic hater, and my hit was always Runic tip to 0 and nothing else. That's it. I just want tip gone. I just want tip gone. I don't care about Fountain. I don't care that it's not a once per turn. Doesn't matter. Just tip should be to 0. But now is not really the right time to hit it. That said, Konami loves hitting things in the wrong moment. Like let's not forget they like banned Curious after nobody was playing it, etc. So who knows? They might surprise us, and they'll probably do it now.
Yeah, and so just kind of my 2 cents on Runic as well. I think that if you look at the deck objectively, right? I don't know if we can all agree on the fact that it was kind of a problem for a little bit with like Naturia. It was not necessarily like an issue, but the deck definitely did a lot, and it started showing up quite frequently. And then you started seeing Runic everything. So it definitely got really tiresome. I heard a lot of people just through Discords and through DB just saying like how much they really despise Runic. Like I was at the Columbus Regional and I saw people saying that they were going to drop out of the tournament if they had to play against one more Runic. And I was like, like that's definitely interesting just because like the deck itself, I don't know if it seems just like more boring or just what have you, right? Because like the engine itself is very strong, but it's something that we did see just genuinely everywhere. But just because it's not super prominent right now, just playing devil's advocate here, I don't think that it warrants to just not see a hit. So we'll definitely see. I agree, either Hugin or Tip, one of them's got to give here. But we'll see what they end up doing in the list. So talking about cards that could be on the ban list or not, necessary evils or bannable, Droll is definitely a card of contention right now. A lot of people are talking about this, and I'm just gonna go ahead and start this one off about Droll. Is it a necessary evil or bannable? Now, as much as I hate anything that lingers, I think that Droll is a little necessary. I think it's a little bit more necessary than, say, D-Shifter, but I do think that Droll is pretty necessary for the game. Yes, it's super toxic and it shuts you out of a lot of situations, but imagine if you didn't have Droll against those situations. Like, it's one of the only cards that mitigates so many issues and also does not hurt you for 2 turns, like a Shifter. Like, I think if Shifter was 1 turn, I think it'd be a lot more acceptable. Whereas Droll is only 1 turn, and yes, it can make you pass turn, but at least it's only 1 turn.
It's a huge problem because I think it's not only a necessary evil, it's also a matter of a lot of bad design in the game. This card is probably my niece's age, or probably even older. Card is from way back when. Stop adding cards from your deck. That's absolutely fine. Let's just put it on a card, print it, ship it. And now we're at a point where, on one hand, you're saying it's a necessary evil because we have a deck like Super Heavy Samurai, it just pops out of nowhere, and that's the only way to stop it. On the other hand, you have cards like Shifter, and you have a lot of other, not as strong of a lingering floodgates, but you have a lot others that do similar things that shuts off a mechanic for the rest of the turn. And at this point, I don't think it's bannable, because if I'm facing Super Heavy Samurai and I'm a branded player that can only fit 6 non-engine in his deck, it's not fair for me to lose the game if I lose the die roll. It doesn't make sense. But it's also an inherent design problem with the game. It's just like, the snake eating its own tail or whatever, that, it is necessary evil, but it's also bannable, but it's also, we don't have any other choice because this is how we contend. So if I have to play 3 hand traps in my deck, it better be those super effective ones. Otherwise, I don't stand a chance in the game anyway.
Yeah, so I agree with you that, Droll is this card that has been out for over a decade. It's a card that, at the time, it was very targeted for specific strategies. And now it's basically like any combo deck, save Ishizu Tier Elements of the past, few years, kind of gets bodied if Droll resolves. But it's a very frustrating card to play against. And I think the idea that like a Super Heavy Samurai turn only ends if you have Droll or Shifter, it's like if you ogre a Scarecrow, or you gamma a Scarecrow, or like there's a lot of things that can potentially end their turn. If you have a couple of hand traps, they're probably not going to play through that, and they're probably going to end on maybe Baron Pass, if that. So I think that it may be a necessary evil, but I can't get past the fact that like this is going to be a card that's going to continue being a problem if it's not addressed, either the card itself or the way the game is played. Perhaps if we move towards combo decks that aren't constantly adding from deck to hand, maybe we can have maybe this wouldn't be as much of a problem. But as long as we keep having these decks that are so reliant on adding, Droll is going to continue to be a problem.
I have one very simple thing to say. If a format exists where Droll is good, then Droll is not the problem. That's my opinion on it.
So I think that's very interesting too, because I caught myself saying this on stream the other day. I was like, I would rather face down 3 Colossus than 1 Droll. And I think that's super funny because like we have Book of Eclipse, we have like so many cards, super poly, like they can just outright deal with things like Colossus, and we're like, all right, cool, like we have outs. But then like the second Droll resolves, it's just anything that's a lingering effect in the game inherently makes me frustrated, and that's just how it is. Like Dweller, you name it, right? Like it's just annoying. But like I'm so torn with Droll. This is just one of those cards that I'm like, it's necessary, it's bannable. It's necessary, it's it's like it's super crazy for this card just put like this much turmoil, like just in so many people's opinions about it, like up and down, just because like it's really, really strong. It makes someone pass turn, but like, do we need it against certain situations? So I think that's gonna be definitely one for the comments to let us know what you think about Droll.
I think that also as a Master Duel player, because I think that's like where I'm primarily known for, we might have a slightly higher tolerance to lingering floodgates on our hand traps because we play with Maxi. So,
All right, so I have a very important question for everyone as well. Are we allowed to have good cards? Now, this comes from a place where you see in the format, people complain about a few different cards, especially these 3. Zeus, Magnamut, and Talents. Should cards like this exist? Are we allowed to have good cards? And are these too good to have in the game?
I could start off talking about one of these because I saw that we were going to talk about it later, and so I didn't bring it up in the ban list discussion. but I am a huge hater of the triple tactic series of cards, both thrust and talents. I think that these cards are released under this guise of let's help you break boards and let's help you go second and let's make Yu-Gi-Oh! A little bit less coin tossy. When in reality, the formats where these cards excel in are the formats where you get to use them going first. And nothing feels worse than hand trapping your opponent and thinking like, okay, like I hand trap my opponent. I'm going to get a chance to play now. It's going to be fine. And then talents look at your hand and now they know everything. And now they play with full knowledge and you do not. This was something that was extremely toxic during Ishizu Tearlament format, which was like my favorite format. And I remember a lot of my playtesting sessions during that format were essentially like me asking my partners, like, do you have talents? Because if you have talents, we could just go to the next one. I don't need to play this out. Just let me know if you have talents and we'll go to the next one. It's fine. And talents for me is a card that I detest. I do not like cards that kind of like feel like they're for going second, but they actually just make going first stronger.
I think in the vein of another card on this, Magnuma, this card is one that it's not necessarily broken right now. It's very strong, but because we're not in a format that is ruled by lights and darks that need to resolve in the graveyard or things like that, it's not ruling the format. But it's a card that is so powerful in being able to grab another of its kind, or to grab your combo starter if you're playing a dragon deck or a card that uses a dragon as a starter. And in terms of it being a 2500 body, that's a level 6 that helps you make things like Beatrice and Wallow that you can just stick on the board. This card, at some point or another, and they've already done this in the OCG with hitting a bunch of the Bystials, this is a card that it is too powerful to be in the game, but right now it is not as big of an issue just because of the particular meta that we're in.
Starlight Magnuma win.
Yeah, maybe when it's at 1, then it's affordable. But I think that it's funny that you put Zeus here together with Magna and Talents. First of all, I agree with both of you. I think really good point, especially like the Talents punish. It just feels wrong at times.
Yes.
I'm trying to play my game. I get punished. I'm currently using this, again, as a going first tool to bait out a hand trap because it's such a hand trap heavy format that I can get Drolled, Veilered on Aluber, Gammad on Cartesia. Absolutely fine. Show me the hand. I'll get rid of the Ash Blossom and I'll play Branded Fusion and Gimmick Puppet, blah, blah, blah. Right? This, at that, it's an exceptional card, right? It's probably not the intended design. It's the 3 combo of Confiscation and Delinquent Duo and whatever and Change of Heart, and it's a very strong card. I think that Zeus is. I'm going to talk about Zeus because you talked about the other things. I do like a series of tweets over on Twitter where I just call out bannable cards. The most famous ones are Axis Code Talker and Baron the Fleur. Okay. Recently, I've added Zeus in. And I think Zeus actually drew more backlash than Axis Code and Baron. I think Zeus might actually be fine. I think that Zeus obviously has a problem with, the ease of which you can make it. You can make it really, really easily today. You can put in a Santa Claus in defense, attack into it with an Ggez, make a Zeus. You can make, some decks can make like a 6-8 material Zeus, and it's really, really toxic. But people commenting on my tweet were like, this is our main going second tool against a lot of decks. You can try to bait out some interactions, find a way in with Zeus. But even if you justify it as, this is our only way to break the board, it's still an extremely, extremely powerful card that is way too easy to make in this format. If you look at all 3 of these, you can combo with all of these to make Zeus. You can take a Talents, take a monster, attack into it, make a Zeus on top of it. This is something that people actually do. And I think actually Zeus might be the weakest one out of the 3. maybe, but Magna is also very like format specific. But we are obviously allowed to have good cards because they're everywhere. All cards are insane, so it's a problem.
Yeah, and I bring up these three in particular because I hear a lot of arguments about these cards, and obviously there's other ones that could be mentioned here too. But so looking at the game in general, I do think that we are allowed to have good cards, and I say this all the time on stream. If you're not on my stream already, check it out in the description below. But it's really cool just because like we have cards in Yu-Gi-Oh that you read them and you're like, this card is busted, right? Like this card is insane. You have to put it in a perspective because like when you look at Zeus, right? You're like, this card is insane. But then you got to look at it and be like, is it as insane as something like Roarkallos? And I had this conversation with someone the other day. And because we were actually talking about this before Kit got banned. And we're like, it's broken, but is it like broken? And at first we were like, I don't know, like it adds something and it mills 5 and it summons, it's pretty good. And then we're just like, you know what? No, this card's like broken. And then it got banned. And like it's really interesting because there are certain cards in the game that you're like, wow, this card's like the craziest thing I've ever read. And then you gotta be like, but is it though? Like, is it really like that crazy? And that's where I think that a lot of people kind of like lose perspective on what is a good card and what is an insane card. And again, that's also very much so perspective based, but you have to look at like what they do and really how like generic they are, or in the specific deck that they're played in, how crazy are they really compared to the rest of the format. So let's jump on in what our thoughts are on the new meta. Talking about Pearly, Super Heavy, Kashtira, Branded, of course, they've been around, but now we have 2 new contenders in the fray. What do we think about what we have so far?
Where's Mathmech?
It's there. I didn't include it, but it's there.
You included Granguignol to please me, right? It's not really the fourth best deck.
It's
let's
still
let's face
solid.
it, guys. I think this format is kind of trash. It makes me so think about a branded player in an Ishizu tier format. That was probably the worst experience ever. Like that was basically put your cards away until Kid gets banned and half of the deck gets limited, and like just sit this one out. It's impossible. But now it's a bit different now because you can contend. And the reason why you can contend is because of the variety of decks, and we're going to talk about it. I'm not going to spoil the next slide. I think that right now we have, let's take Super Heavy, Kashtira, and Pearly, just like as the examples of the possibly the top 3, maybe. It's a bit convoluted. You have Pearly, which is a Towers Turbo. You have Super Heavy, which is like a pretty classic combo deck, even though it does like a lot of toxic stuff just because those cards are legal. So you can bring up cards from whenever and just summon them because you draw your entire deck. And then you have Kashtira, which is basically like a glorified version of Fluandereeze, which we already know that is going to get slaughtered on the ban list. So it's already weird to play in that sort of format. So we're all extremely aware that this format is super temporary, and it seems like there's no cohesion. There's too many decks, and right now every deck is trying to be like the most toxic. And if you look at Super Heavy, they're probably the least toxic out of all of them, right? You have like an Axis Code Bang Bang, you have a Towers, you have Shifter deck. I really don't like this format because it seems like ever since Photon, and now we're continuing this, everybody is trying to do the dirtiest stuff on the board, and it's kind of like we need like a hard reset, guys. It's getting super dirty.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on that. I'm not the biggest fan of this format either, and I agree that it's like we're all trying to be very toxic to each other to win games. And, you know, this might be a bit of the teacher in me being like, can't we all just be nice to each other? But even being nice to each other, it's like, I would love to see a format where it isn't just ruled by these floodgates, where it's, and including Droll in that equation as well, where it's not ruled by, oh, did you draw Shifter against me? Did you draw Droll? Did you gimmick puppet me? Did you put down Spell Canceller? Did you put down a Towers and I just don't have a Kaiju or something? So I think I would like this format a bit more if and when Kashtira gets hit, just because then we wouldn't have to. I feel like I can deal with everything, but then a deck locking all my spell and trap zones and putting a macrocosmos on my field, I'm like, that's a bridge too far for me now. I was already dealing with that before, but now having to work with that as well, it's entirely frustrating to me. I think that by the time we have Duelist Nexus format, things will be a little bit different. But for right now, I don't blame people, myself included, for feeling a bit lost in the game.
You know what format wasn't dominated by floodgates and trying to do unfair things? Ishizu tier element format, my favorite format. That's just like me being silly. But my actual opinions with the format are that I actually think the decks we have are kind of cool. I have some issues with certain decks. Like I think I'm a little bored of like circular +3 hand traps. I think that Branded has gone untouched for a little bit too long. Like it kind of needs something, you know. Super Heavy Samurai does a lot of things that could be classified as like degenerate or toxic, but in all honesty, it's kind of just like the new combo deck of the week, you know, and that's sort of fine. Kashtira, I also have a lot of problems with it, with just like obnoxious things, being able to play Shifter, Lava Golem, Special Unicorn. It gets tiring, but in all honesty, I don't think the format we have right now is too bad. I just think that it needs it really just needs a ban list. It really just needs a little bit, like just a little bit of curbing of power levels to where like we could really enjoy the diversity, because I know that Nats formats tend to be very diverse, at least last year's was. And while I may not be the biggest fan of diverse formats, I do prefer more condensed formats. I think the majority of the player base does really like these formats, and just something to just curb the power level of these decks so that they're not doing the crazy things they're doing right now would make the format feel a whole lot better.
Yeah, tier format, they were like, you don't like your graveyard getting shuffled back? Here's Kashtira, no graveyard. So it's great. Love that.
Exactly. It's like we just went from like we kind of go from one bogeyman to another, and I don't really like that. But it kind of goes back to Galzo's point about a hard reset of like, I don't want to keep doing this where we just like we ban one and then we have a new one to deal with. Like
It's just a power creep problem. I think your point about tier limits is like tier limits was undoubtedly one of the strongest, if not the strongest deck ever in existence. And when you look back at it now, one of my friends told me that he liked tier format, even though he didn't play tier. It was impossible to play. I think he played dragons or something. It was obviously impossible in tier format, but in tier format, you had the chance to try to play. And that is something that you rarely get to do today. Today, the goal is to outright not give you a chance to play, block your zones, banish your entire deck, blah, blah, blah. And just like, think about when tier was a thing. It was like a few months ago, right? And already the power creep is so incredibly strong that right now it's just like turn ending floodgates and GG's die roll game 2. That's the problem.
Yeah, and even looking more so, like Roarkallos was talking about too, about having the diverse formats and having like multi-deck, like 10, 15 different decks that you can play. I definitely don't love formats like that because it makes sideboarding atrocious. Trying to look at an event moving forward, you're like, all right, what do we play? What do we play against? What is going to be really common to play against? Like, there's way too many variables. Even talking about Drytron coming back into the fray, we have Mathmech, like we were talking about. You have Labyrinth with like the clocks coming into the deck, which is like the most consistent variant of it now. You have multiple sprite variants, multiple runic variants, like so many different things to worry about, right? So me personally, I really hope that we go back to like even a toss type format where there's like maybe 5 good decks at the very most. I personally like tier 0 formats, it's just me. But I really don't like 10, 15 different deck formats.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It's really like, I think that when we're in tier 0 formats, we get to see kind of the best of the top players at the time. And that's not even like a complete picture, because there might be some of these top players who just don't like that tier 0 deck, and so we actually don't get to see them play because their passion just isn't there for it. But it really, when we play in these more diverse formats, it's always that I make a side deck for, a tournament, and then I go in and I expect the one half of the room, I try to side deck for the one half of the room that I'm most scared about, and then it's the other half of the room that I end up with in my side deck. As generic as I try to make it, it still struggles because there are just so many diverse answers that the format is going to require. Whereas, like, the nice thing about a tier 0 format is you kind of know what you're going to be up against in 75% of your games. You know what to side deck. You know what you're bringing in going first each time. So there's merit to it. I think diverse formats tend to bring in more players because there's more play styles that a player may vibe with. There may be new players who come into the game due to that. I know that a lot of people started playing again because they picked up trap trick structures and started playing. But there is something to be said about the pure competitive spirit of a tier 0 format.
So talking a bit more too about having so many different decks in a format, having sleeper picks, I want to hear what everyone's sleeper pick is of the format. Mine is just going to be Marincess, honestly. This is something that a lot of people weren't really talking about. I think having 20 hand traps in the deck is still really solid, but we did just get the new Ice Jade cards, and those cards are wild. I'm not going to lie. Gamira is a really strong synchro. To have that in the deck on top of everything else that you have is really nice. Again, having a lot of hand traps, still being able to recur a lot of your engine. As for a cheap deck, I think that it's something that you could pick up and still do pretty well with.
I don't know how sleeper this is, because it is seen tops, but I will say like a play style. Like, I think that control decks or like trap decks have a very good place in the format right now, and a lot of people are not giving them the attention that they deserve. I believe out of Ireland, we just saw Eldritch get top 16, and it was like the most standard quintessential Eldritch, like 12 floodgates, 3 sanguine, 3 conch, 3 lord, consistency cards, all that, like just very standard. And I look at that and I'm like, are we really still playing that? But yeah, we are, because if every single deck is like main decking 3 Droll, main decking 3 Ghost Ogre, main decking like 3 Veilers, then suddenly it opens up this this avenue for like control decks to come in and really carve their niche. And I think that's the reason why we're seeing a resurgence of Labyrinth right now in particular, which is a strategy that I really enjoy. But it definitely started to fall out of favor once the last format became more solved. But now that this format is not as solved because it's so fresh, you're seeing Labyrinth start picking up the pace again. And so control strategies like that, I think, should be on the radar and should be respected more than they are.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think one of the fascinating things with Labyrinth, which like there is in terms of the Nats this past weekend, as of this recording, a Labyrinth deck won a Nats and went top 8 at another. With a couple of different builds. So we're seeing a wide variety of Labyrinth builds. Some of them are furniture builds, some of them are floodgate builds, some of them kind of are a combination of the two. And you don't fully know, if you hear someone say, oh, I'm playing against Labyrinth, you don't fully know what exactly you're going to be going up against because of that variety to it. So I agree with you that control decks and especially trap decks have a place. Dinomorphia has some really interesting applications in this format. It's a deck that hugely doesn't care about Droll. It doesn't worry too much about cards like Ogre now because of the new basically in archetype Solemn Strike that they have intact. And this is also a deck that you can play a heavy floodgate build. You can play a build that runs 15 to 20 hand traps even if you want. There's a lot of kind of variety to it because with a deck like Labyrinth, there is some level of traps that you still need to play with it. In Dinomorphia, if you're resolving Frenzy and your Rexterm sticks on the board, then it is a rather difficult card to out at times. So I think it has some viability because of its versatility in the way you can run it.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of decks benefiting from the fact that there's just like, when there's so many decks in the format, there's no format. There's top decks, they're strong, but if you're a good deck builder and a good player, you can come into an event and top or maybe take it all home with something weird out of left field because there's not enough room in your deck and your side deck to account for all decks. I think that, especially now, if you're looking at you talked about Engage to 2, right? Even a deck like Striker can, if a deck like Drytron can come in a Droll format and top a Nationals, then, you get lucky with your pairings, you come in as a good player, you know the deck, and a lot of decks can be like, if we're talking about Dynamorphia, probably anything is possible at this point. That's why the format needs to narrow down significantly. It is really good for, newer players or like players who don't like to play meta. They can now come in and sweep. But yeah, it's really exciting to see this national season because, we already had a few Nats, and if there's no ban list soon, it's going to be really, really interesting this season.
Yeah, just because everyone's already expecting things like Cash to die. So if it doesn't die, then, it already was in 3 finals this past weekend. So we'll have to see.
I just don't think we're going to get one, to be perfectly honest.
Hopefully, because I feel like we really need one, but we're still waiting.
Yeah.
And then the last question I have for everyone is going to be: do you like pile decks? I think pile decks are just fun. I think they're a good time. Back when we had like the huge 60 card builds that we were doing for a long time is super cool. I know that not a lot of people were huge on this just because of the fact that they like the decks that have like a lot of their own cards into the archetype and not like 100 different engines to splash in.
Definitely missed them. Thinking about those decks reminds me of like we talked about Tier. I could have never imagined me being nostalgic about Tier, but right now it seems like those pile decks were just like, first of all, super creative, because when you have like a 60 card deck, you need to fill it in with a lot of weird stuff, and then you start seeing new techs. But I think those pile decks right now are really hard to. We don't see them as much right now, because a lot of the vehicles that allowed those decks to happen just aren't there anymore. We don't have Hulk anymore. We don't have Chaos Ruler anymore. We don't have things like Block Dragon. If we add Block Dragon, now with Super Heavy and Vernisylph, you have those pile decks right now being like really, really good in the OCG, but we just don't have those vehicles anymore because they're all banned. And think about this format, you would imagine that you would see some sort of pile deck, but we're not really seeing anything. I really, really miss those decks. I miss playing like Adventure, and there's so much potential. I'm personally like nostalgic about it. That's it.
I actually kind of also feel nostalgic for that format. Like the Adventure pile decks, the Hulk piles of last year. I started playing the game like in paper when Burst of Destiny came out. So I'm a relatively new player, like in paper play. And one of the reasons why I started to get competitive was because of the Adventure engine, the Brave engine, and the piles that allowed you to build, and pairing it up with Rose Dragon and the Tenyis, and seeing like the things that you could end on if you would go into Auroradon, or if you decided to forego Auroradon, you could instead make Verte and DPE, and have all of these different like lines of play that kind of essentially all went through like the same playmaker that is like Halki Fibrax, but had different avenues of getting there, and then like different end boards that could come out after you reach that choke point. This was a time that really like exercised my my deck building muscles, which is not something that I had beforehand. Like when I was just playing before online or something like that, or right at the beginning, I would just copy a deck online and I would build it, and then I would play it, and then I was done with it. But it was thanks to the pile decks, thanks to that like Grand Creators Battle of Chaos format, that I started to really come into my own and started to thinking like, okay, how can I put my own personality into this deck? And I'm very grateful for that, because I would not be the duelist that I am today if it weren't for that experience. So I also feel nostalgia for pile decks. Granted, they have some downsides. For example, they're like inherently very bricky, and like they tend to lack grind game because they don't have an engine to fall back on for like turns 3 and beyond. So that I don't miss. But I do really miss just like the creativity that came from like, what could we do with these 60 cards, Like, I don't know. I miss that.
So for the most part, I'm a 40 card mid-range control sort of person. Like I like decks that have a good grind game, that have a consistent engine, that like they may not put up the strongest thing on turn 1, but they're still going turn 5. If you get there. So the tension that I feel is that I also just love a beautiful combo. And so seeing some of the combos that were pulled out with pile decks, I think were just beautiful to observe. Even like I saw one recently from, I think it was Gabriel Nets. It was basically that Fenrir, like going into a rank 7 was full combo to go through like a bunch of different engines. And I found that absolutely fascinating. I love to see that. But I think it struggles more in formats where we're all trying to flood the hell out of each other. So when we saw like, the base deck, the Rose Dragon pile deck, this was in a format where like Sword Soul was one of the best decks, and even then it incorporated some Sword Soul cards. But when it's in a format where there's a lot more mid-range strategies, a lot more that are just, 3 interruptions and 2 hand traps, then it becomes a bit different than when you're playing against decks that require specific outs. If you're playing a 60-card pile, it might be more difficult to see a Kaiju against Pearly. It might be more difficult to see a Sphere Mode or a Lava Golem against Super Heavy Samurai. It might be more difficult to see Ghost Spell or Called By or DD Crow / Magnamut against Branded if you're trying to stop the puppet lock. That is if the puppet isn't banished. So I think I do miss them to some extent, but I'm also just someone who likes consistent engines that can kind of keep the grind going forever.
Yeah, I love the pile decks. They're really fun. Even my striker pile, I'll never forget that. That's fun. It's one of those things where playing a pile deck it's super cool. Having Enchantress, that's what I was talking about earlier with even like title pitch Enchantress. I'm always thinking about different things that you can do with the Brave engine. Just because the engine itself, I think, is one of the best engines we've ever received. It's just so cool. Even now, having the ability to play like Monodome, right? And then you can put out the token, use Vasas and the token, go into Baron, then use like the Griffin and something else to go into like another 10. Monodome is a really cool deck too. We didn't really touch on that today. It was a cool deck. But there's a lot of piles that you can do, and I'm sure that that's going to be incorporated into it, if anything, next, because like the Prisma combo and whatnot. But definitely pile decks are something that won't be forgotten and hopefully will be replenished in the future. But I do wanted to say thank you all for joining me today. A really great episode, the first one of the new season. I wanted to kick this one off with a lot of cool people, so thank you all for joining me. Definitely go ahead and check out all their socials. I'll leave them all down below in the description. Anyone have any final thoughts?
Good luck, rest of the world. I'm done with my nationals. Have fun. It's going to be a wild season. I mean, it's going to be like every day banlist baiting, copium on Twitch, or another nationals, and eventually like the bigger ones are going to happen, and YCSs, and Konami's keeping us on our toes. I think it's absolutely horrible to not have a banlist date, but hopefully down the line in the future we can get there someday. Konami, don't mad at me.
Global to 1 or Misc to 2. If you want to make me happy, there you go.
Kit to 1. Unlock Shockmaster.
No.
Coming out of nowhere with a shock. No, not that. I'll agree Kit the 1. I'll cope all day on Kit the 1, but shock the 1? I don't know about all that. We just got Teller night. I'm not trying to do that. But I appreciate all of you for joining me today. I hope that everyone has a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Thank you.